welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host, and you might have caught the back of that head. It's the one and only Bob and Penny Lord. They're here as our guest authors. Their new book is Heroes, Popes in Hard Times, and it's published by Journeys of Faith. Great to see you, Penny.
Good to see
And
you,
Bob,
Doug. Good
you know,
to be here.
it's a hackneyed expression to say you need no introduction, but certainly to our EWTN audience, you certainly don't. How many years has it been that you've been on EWTN? Here we are in 2013.
This will be our 27th year. 27th year.
Yeah.
We started in '86, and so we're into our 27th year.
And what number book is this?
26 book.
Yeah.
And this
Not
one,
counting the
it took,
Spanish ones that we wrote.
this one took 2.5 years to do.
Why so long, Bob?
So much research on these dear popes. Originally, it would have been a piece of cake because we were just going to write about all the popes. And then we said, well, that'll never get
like
done.
little paragraph, kind of
we
one
don't
page
write
kind
like
of
that
thing.
anyway.
But
so
the
we're
thing is
silly.
that people, they know us from our books on the Eucharist, Mother Mary and the saints. So a natural progression is, because of our love for the church, would be popes.
Right.
And Penny wanted to write about, especially she wanted to write about Pope Gregory the Great. She loved, and Pius X. Those were her favorites.
Is that why he's right up front?
Right, of course.
You know,
So,
he's polite.
but I looked, we always do this, we look to see what somebody else may have written in the past 20 or 30 years.
And you know, because we don't want to do something that has already been done. That doesn't make any sense.
And we don't want to copy any titles that somebody may have used. So in looking, researching all the books written about the popes in the last 20, 30 years, they were all anti-popes, mostly.
Isn't that a good word?
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, smear campaigns, slurs, no background, and we said, this is terrible. What we have to do is we have to show how these dear popes were heroes. They were, and not really trained for the job. You know, when they were trained to be spiritual leaders, but the popes that we've written about,
Right.
I mean, like going
Like
up against.
soldiers.
Well,
That's
in
what Bob said.
reading your book, Penny and Bob, I would think, you know, how could anybody be trained for what these
went
men
through.
had to face?
Oh God, unbelievable!
That's right, exactly.
But how did they stand up against the powers of hell, against Napoleon, Mussolini, Hitler, Bismarck? I mean, these guys are terrible, and yet our popes, the one that has always been amazing to me is Pius XI, who was a librarian. He had no training at all in anything, and yet the Holy Spirit would always have previous popes pick certain men. Pius X picked the future Benedict XV and Pius XII to write the codification of canon law, and then Benedict picked this Bishop Ratty, he was called Achille Ratty, who had no experience in the field. Sent him, I mean, he was the librarian in the Vatican. He sent him to Poland to become a papal delegate in Poland. Guy had he had no knowledge of what to do, and he became one of the strongest popes.
Well, it's interesting too in looking at the book because you have several popes in here: Pope Gregory I, Pope Pius VII, Blessed Pope Pius IX, Pope Leo XIII, Pope St. Pius X, my grammar school, Pope Benedict XV, Pope Pius XI, Venerable Pope Pius XII, and Blessed Pope John Paul II, and also you talk also about our past recently Holy Father Pope
yes.
Benedict, who obviously
One of
with
the
the
greatest.
resignation. So,
Right.
but let me ask you, you know, I mean, some of these names jump out as being people you would think you'd write about. I'm kind of surprised listening to you say, you know, people know about, in a sense, about Pius XII, and they think about
Everybody
him
knows
and everything
about him.
else,
Yeah,
and
all
he
slander.
gets a lot of things attacked, but he was a great
he
man.
went through.
But kind of like Pius XI kind of got lost in the sauce there.
right,
Is
he
that
did.
why you were interested in
Yeah,
him?
well, he is the least known, and yet he was the one he stood up against all of these terrible people. He did things that no other pope did. Every other pope has written encyclicals and that would have to go through the bishops and the cardinals, and they would have to tell the people. Well, it got so bad in Germany that, I mean, Hitler had been so really bad to him that he wrote he had the help of Pacelli, who then became Pius XII,
Right.
and an American priest, and they wrote an encyclical. In German. In German. See, they always wrote these things in Latin. This is the first time they wrote it in German. Snuck it into the country, and had all the bishops and priests read it from the altar on the same day. It was called Burning Concern, and it just ripped into the Nazis. And of course, we paid the price for that, but he had the courage to do this. I mean, he was a fearless guy. I hate
And
to
because
say
it's a
guy.
positive part of the story, that's probably why we don't hear about it, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, you'll never hear about that. One of the other things he did was he was ready, and just before he died, he wrote a second encyclical, again attacking the Nazis. And he died the day before he was going to give it. Well, then the next Pope, Pius XII, was Cardinal Pacelli. He gave that same encyclical, so that he kind of took up where his predecessor had left off. And of course, the unsung hero was Benedict XV. Nobody talks about it.
He's another one, and who you have in here,
He's
right?
of World War I, and he begged them to go to the bargaining table, stop with all the warring and the killing of people. And the war went on forever.
Well, especially World War I. I mean, you might be able to make somewhat of a case for how World War II had to be fought because of what the Nazis did, but World War I, really, you can look back at that and try to say,
Yeah,
But
should never have
yeah,
happened.
it should never have happened, right?
Think about World War II. Think about Hitler. He started out with a group of thugs. Now, he didn't start out with an army. He talked the whole nation into following him. And a German woman, we interviewed her, and she cried as she said this. She said, he was the only one who gave us hope. We were eating our pets.
We didn't like him, but he was the only one who cared about us.
The only answer.
Well, he was a false messiah.
Exactly.
Right.
And another reason that we believe this has to be read, is that history keeps repeating itself. Our books say it, Doug, every time.
Right.
I look back at
Well,
one
there's
of
no
our
new
books,
sin under the sun, right? So, I mean,
Exactly.
it's the same.
and you have to know what's going on today. A lack of knowledge of God is what is destroying.
Well, you talk about that in the book.
Yes,
Yes, that's a
And
very
that's
important
what-
point. That was
is-
Pius X that's spoken about that.
Right. And okay, where is the attack? It's on the church. Why is it on the attack on the church? Because the church teaches the truth. Has to. A wonderful thing's happening, Doug. That we're uniting. It's a miracle. We have people calling us, people of the Hebrew faith, Jewish, Protestant, and Catholic, and they're all saying the same thing. We want to know more because we've got to get together. We have one common enemy, and that's the enemy of God. And so I believe this is important. So many of our Catholics don't know the history of our church.
And they don't know what these dear people went up against.
Right. Let me ask you a question. How did you define that these the hard times? What was a predicate? What was a basis for saying these are the hard times you wanted to focus on?
Well, okay,
The monsters.
Napoleon
Napoleon.
Bonaparte arrested. First of all, Pius VI died in captivity. Pius VII was elected, and he had 14 years of terror with Napoleon, and yet he never gave up
And he never
control.
gave in.
There's a thing, I've got it here. It just kills me that he said this. At the end of his life, Napoleon is in St. Helena, and he said, Alexander the Great declared himself the son of Jupiter, and in my time, I find a priest who is more powerful than I am.
Right.
He could not break the Pope. I mean, if he's not living in hard times, 14 years of so many years, I think 4 or 5 of them were in actual imprisonment.
Right, right.
And he belittled him. He had him walk through the mud to him. You know, no respect whatsoever. Now, this is very important for us to understand. Either we protect our church, our papacy, we're going to lose it.
Well, and again, that whole came out of the French Revolution and the follow-up
Yeah.
after that. And of course, you talk about that
that's
in the book
another
as well,
story, yeah,
about
French
how the
Revolution.
church was really attacked and how, because the church was seen as aligning with the aristocracy, it became an enemy.
Right. And so the church, and this went on up until Leo the 13th, where the church either didn't exist or existed under terrible conditions in France for years and years and years. And all these popes had to deal with that. Pius XII, Leo the 13th, Pius IX. And I mean, Pius IX, who did not make friends with him, he was a kind of a feisty guy, and he would not give in to any of them. And so they call Leo the 13th God's diplomat, because although Pius IX was correct, and he went through hell with Bismarck, not Bismarck, Bismarck at the time.
Yeah, that would have been the time, right?
And taking away the papal states, which just, took all the power away from the papacy, temporal power. But he wouldn't give in to them. And so when Leo the 13th came in after he died, everybody hated the church. And so he had to diplomatically
And
make
Pope,
peace.
Pope Leo the 13th, as you point out, of course, a lot of us remember really because of the prayer to St. Michael,
Yes.
right? Which obviously
And
here at
Saint
EWTN
Teresa.
really Mother helped to repopularize.
Yes, and do you remember
We have
what
the
he
chaplain, in
said?
fact, with her.
He said Satan has entered the
Sanctuary.
The sanctuary, right.
And then that was repeated by
Paul the
VI.
Sixth, right.
So it's,
The smoke of Satan.
something
Yes,
is
okay.
going on. And there have been attacks on the church from without, from within. Most of the things we write about are attacks from without. I'm sure they were. We don't want to get into any kind of intrigues that were going on inside the church, because that would be speculation. But we do know what they had to put up with from the powers without, who all of them trying to destroy not destroy it, but take it over.
Right.
It's like in Mexico, and we don't really write about it in this book, in Mexico,
Right.
when Calles came into power, he said, the church can operate freely. The only things you have to give all your allegiance to me, not to the Pope.
Right.
And as long as you do that,
Kind of what we see in
Well,
China with
yeah.
the
Isn't this,
patriotic church.
isn't this what's being said now? You can still be a Catholic hospital, but you have to
Good
have.
point.
Yeah. You just said it. You said it exactly. That's why they have to know about these popes. They have to know what our history is, what our heritage is, what we fought for all these years, because that will decide whether we have a country. This country is the only country that was founded under God. Do
Right.
people know that?
And I was thinking, because you talk about it early in the book, I guess early you talk about the whole idea of the patrimony for the church. And in a
Right.
sense,
Yeah.
that's what we've been passed on too. We have this stake
That's
in
right.
what the saints have done and stood up for over the years, and we owe them to our forefathers.
exactly.
Exactly.
It's not just our own, in a sense, to give up or give away. It really
And
is.
it's our history. It's who we are as a people.
And this patrimony, the patrimony was given to the church in thanksgiving for certain things, like the kings would give money, or they would leave land property to the church. It was in thanksgiving on their deathbed, in their wills, or whatever. So this was something that nobody had a right to take away from them. And yet, and we didn't write about Martin Luther in here either, but the German princes during Martin Luther's time wanted to embrace his Protestantism, because they wouldn't have to pay royalties to the papacy anymore.
Well, they brought about.
That's what that brought about with them. So there's a lot of that. There's
Right.
that one thing about signal grace. There's,
Right.
I see you have that.
Well, in the introduction, I have to. Anytime I see Mother's name
Right.
pop up, and obviously you have her in the beginning as well, but you talk about something that she said to you one evening during a television program. Then you were made on St. Maximilian Kolbe and Edith Stein, and I'm talking about where Mother said, a special grace given to those who have to perform special tasks for God or undergo severe anguish for God. We recall that Mother was extremely serious that evening.
Mother was serious.
She was a prophet.
She was.
Yeah.
She was.
The thing I always think of with that, with her always saying, the day is coming when you won't be able to sit on the fence anymore. You'll
Yeah.
have to be with Christ or not.
That's right. And she used to say to us, you know, we're going to go underground. They're going to send us underground. Mother knew it. Mother knew it. Everything that's been happening, Mother prophesied. And, you know, sometimes I'm talking to her. Why? Why are you going through all of this? It has to be the worst suffering she's ever had.
To be silent, I
Right.
think, is
But
her worst
because
suffering.
she's needed. She's
But it's true that I really believe that these men were given signal grace, a special grace, to do what they had to do. I mean, this, I go to this Pius XI, although, you know, nobody knows anything about him, but he just, complete turnaround from, I mean, he was a librarian in Milan, and Pope Pius X asked him to come to Rome, and
Well,
he's,
you even think of Paul VI, which you don't talk particularly about in this book, but the idea of here was someone who was considered very easygoing. And the fact that, regardless of how much pressure was put on him, when push came to shove with Humane Vitae, he stood up.
he did,
And
he was
he's
a
been
martyr.
proved
He's been-
prophetically correct. Everything he said in that document has all come
And
true.
when he said it, there were even religious. We heard religious saying the people don't accept it, so it doesn't count.
Right, right.
And how do you figure that out? The Pope makes an encyclical. How come it doesn't
Right,
count? Because the people don't accept
They
it.
don't accept it.
And
right.
this, I don't want to mention his name.
And he
'cause
was a
I don't want
martyr
to give
for
him
that.
any free publicity, but he said, this ultra liberal, he said, well, nobody listens to the Pope anyway.
Right.
When he heard that, the Pope wasn't.
And I wonder
Right.
if there's not.
But
some
Napoleon
truth-
understood it.
Oh,
Yes.
Stalin didn't understand it, but found out later his famous line about how many
Hitler-
divisions does the Pope have, right,
Right.
and stuff, right.
And Pius
He
said-
found out,
Yeah.
right.
And Hitler understood it. And the guy in Mexico, he understood the power of the church. They didn't want to destroy the church. They wanted to take over.
Right, you were making that point. Let me go back, just because as we're going along here, let's go back to the beginning, Pope Gregory the Great. You wanted to write about him.
Yes.
And you were writing about him, and
Yeah.
it's when you guys kind of decided to write this book.
Yes,
What was it about him that really impressed you the most?
Well, you know, he was born into wealth and position, and yet everything he did was for the people. Everything. Let's see.
Well,
His name in Greek means watchman, and that's what he was.
Right, and we know him today, of course, right, because the namesake of like Gregorian chant, right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
But
oh, yeah.
not only that, but he kind of formulated the church of the Middle Ages so that we would have what we have today based on rules and regulations
reforms that he
set
made,
down
okay.
and early on, and he was brilliant in doing this. In addition, he wanted to convert the English.
Oh, yes.
Something
Right, you were talking about it, but it's like so many things with God. He wants to go, they call him back,
Right.
but then he finally gets to do it, right?
And you know,
Well, he sent
But in God's
Augustine
time,
of
right.
Canterbury
Right.
over to England, and he actually did
Right.
convert England.
and you know, and here is such a great man. You know, there were only 3 that were declared great, and he was one of them. A great man. And he says he saw this little boy, and he asked the
Little blonde
a little
boy.
blonde boy, and he asked him what was the Eucharist? What was it? And the little boy said, Jesus Christ. And he said, I gave him communion. You know, I mean, he was a great man. He everything he did was to foster the church and the rules of the church, and he gives a little boy communion.
He gave away all the treasury of the Vatican during the plague. The
Right.
plague was
Well,
destroyed
you talk about that in Rome.
in Rome, and he walked with the people in procession. And at one point, they say that St. Michael was seen above Hadrian's castle, proclaiming the end of the plague. And this was during his Gregory's walk with all the people of Rome in procession.
Right. In fact, I think you have like an image of that. I think in the book
Could be
here,
in
right on page 29, Pope Gregory,
Right.
the great procession through the streets
Yes.
of Rome. Exactly.
And
Right.
He was
visit
for the
to
people.
the 7 churches.
I mean, he would
Started with
he
him.
would give this patrimony of Peter. He took that money, he would give it to the people. He'd just take it and give it to the poor. So the Vatican never had any money in the treasury because he was giving it all away. But that was part of that patrimony.
So when someone reads this book and sees about the hard times and the great men that have been called to the papacy, and having, looking back a few months to some recent events that were somewhat surprising at the time,
Right.
what is the lesson for us to learn going forward, do you
Well,
think?
I think for us to know more about our popes, to know what they have done and how strong they have been and how they have kept the church going, and to support them. See, like this guy that says, nobody listens to the Pope anyway. That would be terrible if there was some truth in that. And if there is truth in that, then we've got to change it. Then we've got to make people listen. I mean, especially Benedict XVI is a brilliant. I mean, he wrote so many beautiful things. You've got to stand behind a man like that. You got to support him. He needs support, even though, he's up there and he's got advisors and stuff, but he's the last word.
Oh,
He needs the support of the people. He needs, like Juan Pablo II, everybody, the Mexicans would rave about how they loved him. Well, he needs that. All of our popes need to hear that.
I think learning about the popes is part of learning your faith. Catholics have no more respect for the faith. How dare they? All the blood that's been shed. We're the only faith where we have martyrs who gave their lives for the faith. We're the only faith where our founder was here, Jesus, and he died for us. To deny our faith is to deny Jesus. And these kids, they drive you crazy.
I think there should be course in Catholic schools on the popes.
Right.
They
Like there used to be in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, And we, especially because what you see in your book here, and what we used to get in the old days, you could see how the popes, not only from a spiritual but a historical perspective, played such an important role, really, in how civilization grew and how most of the advances, certainly in the Western, let alone in the Eastern, came through the work of the Catholic
popes.
Church, right, and the popes.
And you take like Pius X, who I'm very much in love with, because he's the one that started CCD.
Right.
I went to a public school. That's how I learned about my faith to that degree. I wish I'd gone to
And he
a
encouraged
Catholic.
communion, more frequent communion, and at a
yes,
younger age,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, we both really write with a different focus. My thing is, what's happening today? How does this affect us today? What do we have to know?
Well, that's a good question, because we're just about out of time. Just before we go, what is the next book you're working on? Or have you already started it?
Well, we haven't started on it yet, but we were thinking of if this gets the acceptance that we think it will, we'd like to do another.
Right.
We'd like to continue to teach about the popes, how great these popes were.
Well,
So,
you have an open invitation anytime,
you
Bob
so much.
and Penny Lord, to
Thank
come
you.
by Bookmark and
Thank
EWTN, Old Friends of Mother Angelica and the Network. Speaking here with Bob and Penny Lord about their new book, Heroes, Popes in Hard Times, published by Journeys of Faith, and of course available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, as is all their books.
That's right.
Join us next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark.